I'm hosting this event from home. And this week's big news at the bookstore is that we are open for browsing by appointments Thursdays and Saturdays. We'll still be focused on taking orders by phone and email and via our website for shipment and pick up from the porch. But we are seriously looking forward to seeing some of you in person in the store. We have lots of other events planned, and I encourage you to visit the norwichbookstore.com for the calendar. And while you're there, sign up for the newsletter. And for tonight's event, the format is, well, actually for tonight's event, first of all, we ask the audience to keep their video off and their audio off. And then we recommend that you choose speaker view, which makes the person who's talking the big screen and everybody else sort of disappears. And then gallery option is what shows everybody. And then turn on the chat option, which is down at the bottom of your screen underneath the picture. And you'll see that there's a column on your right that you can add questions and comments into, and the book link will be there. And then we will be recording this event so we can post it to our website later. And I want to thank Michael Prowse, whose name you'll see hopping in and out, for keeping the tech side of these events going smoothly. I'm glad he's doing it, not me. So the format tonight is a brief introduction of our guest, and then here's a presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for question and answer. And I will pick your questions out of the chat when we get to that part of the program and synthesize them or combine them or even just read them out. So if you think of things during Frank's talk and you want to have him expand a little bit on them, just put something in the chat and I'll keep track of it and share it when we get to that portion of tonight's program. So this evening, we welcome Frank sort of back to Norwich, even though at the moment he is currently living in Mexico, and that's where he's going to be speaking from. In his new book, Behind the Red Veil, subtitled An American Inside Gorbachev's Russia, he recounts 8 trips to Russia. His first visit was in 1985 at the beginning of Gorbachev's leadership, and the last was in 1994 after the fall of communism. Frank became intrigued with USSR, he's written in the book, at an early age, fascinated by a chart in his 4th grade classroom. That goes way back. He spent most of his career teaching 8th graders in public and private schools in Massachusetts and, of course, here in the Upper Valley. And I know a lot of people who signed up tonight remember that period of his life. And during that time, he pursued his interest in all things Russian and Soviet. He has 4 other books, all on teaching to his credit, one of which, Teaching from the Middle of the Room, he launched here with us a decade ago. Pavel, let me see if I can say this, Kozhovnikov. He's a lecturer at the Russian Languages and Cultures at the University of Colorado, wrote about this book, quote, an interesting and insightful perspective of an American educator's experience within the Soviet education system. Thoms manages to write his story with warmth and wisdom, a delightful read. Without further ado, I'll turn the program over to you, Frank.
Well, thank you, Liza, and my goodness, as you said, 10 years ago, I launched my first book with you, and 30 years ago, I started writing this book, Behind the Red Veil, as you showed, and I'll show too, because I have a copy. And 5 years ago, I put it away 30 years ago when Gorbachev resigned, because I figured it wouldn't have much meaning if Russia was going to become a democratic country, which I didn't believe. So 5 years ago, when all Russian things came out into the news, I revised my interest and wrote it. And I wrote a sentence for tonight to give pause before we start. I'm asking you to come along with me as we travel safely and venture back in time. Consider this evening to be a relief from all the politics and offer to rebalance our place together in the world. So I'm ready to start, taking off my hat with my pandemic non-haircut. I'm ready to go. Here are the opening words of the book from the introduction. I grew up in a world of mechanical toys with backs and bottoms and tiny metal tabs that invited prying. Some were wind-ups. that whirred and buzzed in unpredictable directions. Others stood still, playing tin drums or running strings around pulleys. Most were made in Japan. I played with them, took them apart, and reassembled them. I would peer through the narrow hardboard slits at the back of my Motorola table radio. I applied gentle pressure to the on switch until it clicked to see the orange glow alight in the vacuum tubes, bringing in the sound. I was part of its creation. The front had a dark brown glazed plastic Venetian design, hidden openings to let out a sound. Late at night, I would spin the right-hand knob, sliding its red line dial at the top behind clear plastic. Stations having static slid by until I came to WRO, 590 AM in Albany, or WTRY, 980 AM in Troy, broadcasting from New York over the Taconic Bridge. No presets, nothing automatic, no worries except Mom, who might discover my late night listening to the Inner Sanctum or the Jack Benny Show. The radio was mine and sat on its special place on the shelf by my pillow. And I discovered Radio Moscow, fascinated more by where it broadcasted from than with its content, which made little sense to me. The Motorola was my private ticket to life beyond my family and the small inn where I grew up. Perhaps it was my childhood curiosity that with mechanical things that provided tabs for my mind to pry beneath the obvious, particularly when it came to the secrets of Russian and Soviet history and culture. So my fascination with Russia started earlier, as Liza said, but the breakthrough came in 1963 when Del Goodwin, who many of you may remember, asked me to leave the 9th grade history class that I had taught in my first year of teaching at Hanover and to go down to the junior high and teach area studies, South Africa, South America, and Russia and communism. He said, when you teach the unit on Russia and Soviet communism, be sure to treat the ideologies as legitimate, not as evil or wrong. Be honest with your students. His request sealed the deal for me. Excerpted from chapter 1, Away from the Tour Bus. My students absorbed Marx's economic determinism and dialectical materialism, his concept of history as progress, the capitalist class structure, the 5 laws of capitalism, the role of the petty bourgeoisie in oppressing the proletariat. We concluded by reading and discussing the Communist Manifesto. Our work with Marx led into the heart of the unit, a close scrutiny of the Soviet Union. First Russian history, then Soviet life and culture. We invoked the Soviet classroom, assessed documents from the Soviet embassy in DC, put on a Meet the Communist panel for a neighboring junior high. Students took exams to become young pioneers and published our own newspaper, The Spark. This is a copy of the newspaper, which you can sort of see, Iskra at the top and the hammer and sickle. And the motto for the paper was, all the news that's read, R-E-D, we print. In the 70s and 80s, I was in the Richmond School and I taught units on Marxism and Soviet communism different ways in each decade. But in October of 1985, I had a real stroke of luck. Because of Libby and Clint Gardner of Norwich and their Bridges for Peace program that was sending 10% of the US citizens to the Soviet Union on exchanges, I signed up to join one of their tours. And I was accepted to go in October, to go to Leningrad, Kiev, and Moscow. And the blessings of the school and Pat Davenport, I was given a leave of absence to go. Here are my first moments on Russian soil. A brisk wind startles us as we step down the Aeroflot ramp and traverse the tarmac of Leningrad's Pulkovo Airport in October 1985. A mist hovers below the night sky. Jet engines swallow the sounds of our voices as we slink towards a darkened terminal. We pass under blue flickering neon signs, Leningrad, Leningrad, and step through a half-opened, broken aluminum doorway. We are in a bleak space, surrounded by unfamiliar sights and sounds. No sign of the Red Sox, no 7-Eleven, no colleagues. I've entered a cocoon spun by Inturist, the Soviet travel agency. My 18 fellow travelers and I, the only foreigners in the airport, have agreed to abide by the tour's expectation. But I am longing to discover what I will not be invited to see. I think about the ubiquitous Matryoshka, nested Russian souvenir dolls, which you probably all know quite well. An example of them right here. Depicting a society hidden in layers. Intourist will show me the outer layer, the polished one, reflecting the ordered, confident communism I first heard about as a child. A perky young woman, barely 5 feet tall, with brown, flailing, wild curls, 2 children close to her side, steps in front of me. She asked me in Russian if an Englishman was on our plane. With 10 days of Russian under my belt, I answer her. After meeting her children, I hand them 2 pen pal letters from my students. And she hands me a crinkled scrap of brown paper with her name, Natasha, and a telephone number. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a security guard watching. 2 days later, on Sunday, I skipped the trip to the Russian Orthodox monastery, and using my guile, which I don't know how I succeeded, I found my way to a metro, took the metro to her part of the Petrogradskaya part of the district, to her flat, and found her flat. I had lunch with her 2 kids, and her husband, Slava. But the day before, on Saturday, I also skipped a tour. I kept doing that. I wanted to go and find 2 Dartmouth students that friends of mine in Hanover had asked me to do. They gave me 2 mini teddy bears. I put them in my cranberry lens and coat pocket and headed out for the Nevsky Prospect, the Broadway of Leningrad. In the book, I write, gawking under the warm afternoon sun, amid the bustle of Nevsky Prospect, I spied 2 young men eyeing me among the crowd. My stomach tightened. I thought about the dollars in my wallet. Nina had warned us not to exchange money on the street, only to spend our dollars at the Berezovka, stores that were for privileged Soviets and foreigners. Assuming the KGB was everywhere, I didn't want to take any chances. The shorter man, in a dark trimmed beard with a receding hairline, approached first. His handsomer sidekick, taller, blonde, wearing large pink-tinted clear plastic rim glasses, followed. "Hey, you from America?" asked the bearded one in good English. "I'm Alexei, and this is my friend Roman. Are you looking for Soviet things? We can get them for you." "No, thank you," I said as firmly as I dared, my stomach still a quiver. Was I in for some trouble? To deflect them from further requests, especially asking to exchange rubles for dollars, I quickly told them of my mission to find Heather and Carol at the university. "Hey, Frankie from Hollywood, we know these girls," Alexei said with a broad grin. "We are meeting them tonight for dinner." I can read chapter 1 away from the tour bus to find out what happens. Then it was on to Kiev and Moscow on this first trip. An intriguing off-the-bus counter happened in Kiev. Our group departed by train to Kiev After touring St. Sophia's Cathedral, we had dinner in our hotel. Afterward, I stepped outside to get a feel for the city. A young woman, black-haired, dark-eyed, in a long black coat, approached me. She said in English, "Hello, my name is Lara." She started walking into a nearby alley, and I followed cautiously. She had finished school, did not have a job. Before I had a chance to ask her about it, she blurted out, "And I am a heroin addict." We had quite the conversation. It never occurred to me that drugs would have been an epidemic in the Soviet Union. State control would surely have prevented it. Lara opened me to thinking more broadly about this intriguing communist country. How it, too, could manifest its sores like all other countries. For the next 2 days, I stayed with the tour. I had much to think about from our time in Leningrad and my brief encounter with Lara. The last stop was Moscow. We saw the amazing historic sites, which you probably know, St. Basil's, GUM department store, Kremlin. And the last one was the massive Pioneer Palace, where the chosen young pioneer students would come and demonstrate their skills to tourists. Taking a break from the rushing through the palace, I stopped on the landing and peered through a picture window into a darkly, dimly lit large room. A young pioneer girl, blonde with braids, about 10, alone in the near corner in her brown school uniform, red scarf, white apron, her Lenin badge on its apron's halter, stood before a dozen dolls at miniature desks. As other tourists raced up and down the stairs, I watched. Standing before her children, she revealed a curious intensity, directing them with attentive, quizzical, scowling looks. She hadn't noticed me. She seemed to be internalizing a Soviet teacher's demeanor, a deep sense of purpose, devotion, parental posture, in charge. The Soviet teacher served as a surrogate parent for the state and assumed full responsibility for the patriotic character of her students. Would this child become a teacher? It was not the way this Moscow child played school that mattered. It was her desire to play school, a hint of a calling that revealed more than the act itself. This young pioneer, a product of a conformist culture, was cloning the actions of her teachers and emulating them well. Yet she was alone in this room, in a glorious palace where groups of other pioneers were giving demonstrations in bright rooms behind picture glass windows for visitors to admire. Maybe, just maybe, by being alone, she was secretly nurturing her own seed, choosing what she wanted for her own satisfaction and without pretense. We flew home the next day. I had my taste that first 2 weeks, and I decided I was going to be a teacher of Soviet children in Soviet schools, period. So that spring, I received a sabbatical from my school for the next fall. That summer, I went to Norwich University Russian School to learn more Russian. And while I was there, AFS International sent me a letter inviting me to be an exchange teacher in the fall. I could hardly believe it. Apparently, someone had gotten ill, and my transcript, which flew over the transom of the door, was on top of the pile. Anyway, I was going. And between 1986 and 1991, I actually taught in 4 schools in 3 cities, Leningrad, Moscow, and Almaty, Kazakhstan, on the border of China. I was twice selected to be a US-Soviet exchange teacher, and twice I found schools on my own. And in 1994, as Liza said, I taught in Yekaterinburg teachers who were coming to the States to be exchange teachers. So, a year later, from that first trip. It's October 1986. I'm in Leningrad again, the moment I was waiting for. I walked through the front door of my new school, number 185, and into the director's cabinet, director's office, to meet with her and her assistant. By the end of the time before I left, we had subverted the plans of the city officials who had told me that I would observe for a week, teach 3 classes a day, and take Russian. Instead, Elvira and I agreed that I would teach her section of 9th form students the next day. I would teach 5 classes a day, be in the school for the entire time. It was our plan, and that's what we did. From chapter 2, a mini-mythic superhero, writ large, an excerpt from that magical time in School 185. I was the teacher from America. In corridors, children darted past me with curious glances. In classrooms, they giggled at my joking, drawing stick figures and pacing about the room. No matter where I went, I sent students and teachers looking at me, perhaps asking questions, perhaps wondering who I really was. Not only was I the teacher from America, I also felt I was the United States of America. I was among people who knew about my country only from propaganda. Students learned such propaganda from Moscow published textbooks, from political information classes, from propaganda posters, the newspaper Pravda, the state's television nightly news, Vremya. I wanted to give them a different perspective. I would be a dropped pebble in a pond, causing ripples of my America to flow among them. And I was a billiard ball, cued by curiosity, moving with random abandon. For the next 2.5 months, I plunged into life at school number 185, finding my way into the class collectives, into the private lives of a few teachers and brave students. I taught 5 lessons a day to more than 400 children each week, monitored the cloakroom, learned countless first names, played games at recess, had lunch conversations with colleagues, and met students and teachers after school, all the time answering endless questions and asking my own. But little did I know what impression I was making. In June of 2018, at a cafe in Mill Valley, California, I had a conversation with a former student from school number 185, Katja Schraber, who had emigrated to the US in 1997. She said to me on my tape recorder, "Every day you came to our school in green jacket with brown patches on the elbows. It was like a symbol of the free world. All the other teachers wore boring gray and blue clothing. I wrote in my diary, which I found recently, today we had an American teacher, Frank Thoms, come to our school who was wearing a green jacket. He's completely different from our other teachers. He looks like a movie star. And Frank, you brought food into the classroom, which no other teacher did. And sometimes you brought compote and pastry from the cafeteria." The rest of her remarkable comments appear in chapter 4, Anguish and Satisfaction. And my wife reminded me last night of the elbow patches that I had on my coat. Katja said at the same time when we met, she said, "It's curious that you had this green jacket with these patches on the elbows and you were an American. When Russians have patches on the elbows, it's because the coat has torn holes in it. That's why they wear them. But you were different." Before leaving school 185, after 2.5 months, children pleaded for me to come back. "Please come back, Mr. Frank. We want to have lessons with you. Please, please come back." And teachers wanted me to come back as well. And I vowed to do so. However, I got lots of no's. First, I asked Elvira, the director, who had become a very good friend, could please invite me back. And she said, no, I can't. I can't do that. Please go to the city authorities and see what they can do. I went to the city a week before I left. They said, we can't do it either. You have to go to Moscow and talk to the ministry in Moscow. So on the way home, we all went to Moscow to the home. I stopped into the Moscow ministry and he said, no, you can't come. You have to go to Washington, D.C. to get permission. So when I got home, I went to Washington, D.C. and I met with Greg Gurov, director of President Reagan's United States-Soviet Union Exchange Initiative, created after the Geneva Summit. But he said to me, another no. Times are too touchy for such things, Frank. Times are too fragile. I can't give you permission. But I went anyway in May of 1987, the following spring. And when I arrived at the school, not telling them that I was coming, walked in her door, before 10 minutes had gone by, Elvira had clearly said, no, you can't stay. I traveled 6,000 miles, spent $3,000 of my savings, which included 135 days for a small hotel room. As I walked back to my hotel, I recalled the 2-hour concert in the fall at School 185 of songs, poems, stories, and mini plays in my honor, and the pleas from children and teachers. But before I continue about the book, I want to step back for a minute and tell you about the framework of the book. As a writer, I was searching for a paradigm, a theme, something to hold the book together. And one day, I don't remember when, I woke up with the idea of the red veil. It was my concept of the Soviet cloak of deception that it put in front of its people, foreign visitors, and to the world at large. The Iron Curtain was easy to get behind. Take an airplane and you fly over and you're in. But the red veil was very difficult, and it would take a lot of determination and persistence on my part, of which, as people who may know me well, I have a lot of. And then when I got the red veil concept, the writing began to click in. And then I also incorporated the Matryoshka metaphor, which was the idea of getting beyond the outer coating of the large Matryoshka doll, nesting doll, and getting inside and getting to know the people, really. My experience was a piece of truth of what the Soviet Union was really like a fragment of a hologram. A fragment of a hologram, if you look at it, you can see the entire image of the hologram. Like a fragment of a hologram, it was, if I was clear about what I saw and very careful how I told people about it, then maybe readers will be able to see the whole picture. I'm honored to have made this effort. From chapter 3, A Fraught Return, when Elvira, the director of the school, turned me away, as I just told you before, in May of 1987. On the third morning, I awoke from a restless sleep, feeling the impact of my isolation. Instead of heading out to teach at school number 185, I was in a stark room in the International Hotel. Rummaging around my suitcase, I picked out the bag of Viking runes and commentary from Ralph Bloom, which a friend gave me before I left. I brought them to share with Russian friends who liked the occult. Not familiar with the runes, I decided to reach into the bag and take one. I picked Anzus Reversed and read its accompanying message. You may be well concerned over what appears to be a failed communication, lack of clarity, awareness either in your past history or present situation. You may feel inhibited in accepting what is offered, a sense of futility, of wasted motion, of a fruitless journey, may dismay you. Remember that this is one of the cycle runes. What is happening is your process. If the well is clogged, this is the moment for cleaning out the old. Reversed Ansus is saying, consider the uses of adversity. I decided, unlike the usual Frank Thoms that many of you know, I decided to wait, to be patient. 2 days later, a telephone call. What happened after I describe in chapter 3, a fraught return. And a week and a half later, I left for home on the first day of June at 4:30 in the morning before the drawbridges reopened. I crossed the Latany Bridge in a taxi on my way to the airport. I had reveled with friends the night before to celebrate the beginning of the white nights, days of summer where dusk meets dawn without night's intervention. The next items are, I've shared items from the first 3 chapters. Now here are some tastes from the rest of the book. From chapter 5, Teachers as Mother of the State. Moscow School number 21 was the first school I found on my own, which I visited 3 times. Zoya Anatolyevna became a very close friend. She was the only teacher that I met and spent time with in that school. Listen to her comment about cheating. Ilya received 2 Ds on his Russian exam last year, Frank, which meant he would be kept back in the 8th form. When he wrote his makeup exam, there were too many mistakes. He left out dashes, punctuation marks, capital letters, and other things. So I asked the director to give me Ilya's exam. I wanted to just look at it. I took my pen and put in the dashes and commas where necessary. Then I said to her, see, there aren't many mistakes, so we can give him a 3, not a 2. That's why he's with me now in the 9th form. The director had, in a Soviet aphorism, looked through her fingers. She saw, but she didn't see, and said nothing. From chapter 6, the Cult of Lenin. My second school was school number 169 in Leningrad. The first day I'm going to share with you, but I want to tell you first that when I walked into that school and stepped into the front vestibule, a larger-than-life statue of Lenin surrounded by boys greeted me. And when I was on the second floor, a larger-than-life statue of Lenin was also there. I'd never seen this before. So after I left, I write, haven't these people even heard of Mikhail Gorbachev? Are they still living in the Brezhnev era with its strict communist protocols? Or even in the time of Lenin and Stalin? I asked myself these questions as I left school number 169 after my initial meeting with its director and English department head. I had been tossed back into a time before glasnost, before anyone acknowledged communism's uncertain future. I recall the anecdote of the boy whose parents sent him to different schools without success. Each time he was dismissed until at a Catholic school, he became a serious student. When his parents asked him why, he said, they mean business. You should see what they do with those who don't obey. They nail them to a cross. From chapter 7, like in a mousetrap. Borisa Vladimirovna became one of my very best friends at school number 185. In our last conversation in October 98, her prescient words still resonate. Here's an excerpt. You've read Animal Farm? I asked. Sure, I read it 25 years ago when I was in university, but it didn't apply. We never knew we were reading about ourselves. This is the greatest tragedy, that we lived in the middle of all this and managed not to know. As if you were in the eye of a storm, I said. More like I'm in a mousetrap, Frank, as if in a mousetrap. You know, I never believed that German people never knew about the concentration camps. I thought, well, they were lying. And we didn't know about our own. She hesitated. You know, you can do whatever you want with people everywhere. That's the most tragic thing. You could turn people into a crowd, then into a herd, and lead them wherever you want. It can happen in any country, in yours as well, unfortunately. From chapter 8, She. She is a chapter about a student that I met on the very first day at School 185, and we became friends. She invited me to her parents' flat, and we had many conversations. I've not used her name to protect her anonymity. She shared profusely with me. Here's one small example. One late afternoon in an empty classroom, she and I spoke about her test in chemistry, not her major subject. I did well, she said with a smirk, but it was hard. She reached into her book bag and handed me a transparent Bic ballpoint pen with a slip of paper having tiny black lettering, the formulas required for the test wrapped around the inkwell. It took me a long time to prepare this and fit inside, she said, but it was worth it. She received a 4 out of 5 on the chemistry test, a respectable mark. I still have the pen, and if you could see it, you could see the tiny writing that's inside. From chapter 9, Podskaska, Spargaka, and lying. Podskaska. Podskaska was the practice of students whispering answers to their fellow student who was standing trying to answer a teacher's question. Another word for prompting. Of course we prompt each other, confided my young friend Nikolai from the 8A form. It's an important part of our schooling. Teachers give us a mark every day, so we must be ready for every class. But there's too much homework. We have to help each other. It's important to help my friends. More important than helping myself. Oh yes, said wide-eyed Tanya, sitting between Nikolai and me in the Café Tarakan, Russian for Cafe Cockroach, very popular place for them. It is better for me to help others than to excel. To do any less would be awful. I heard the same sentiment in Tallinn, Estonia. Irina, an ebullient 7th former, confided to me why it was important for her classmate to know what she knew. If I don't help her, she gets a bad mark. I must help her. She doesn't want a bad mark. And 3,000 miles east in Almaty, Kazakhstan, Ira, a 10th former, one of the quietest in his class, told me, Podskaska is a form of friendship. Again from chapter 9, I was in New York City in 1987, chaperoning Soviet teachers who had finished their time being exchange teachers. Tasha Ledyanova took me aside and wanted to have a private conversation. This is a very brief excerpt of that amazing conversation. Tasha's soft voice corroborated her gentle, round Slavic features, a trace of the steppe in her eyes. I asked her why she struggled to speak the truth in her life and the role school played. Lying begins in the schools, she said forlornly. That was the main reason I hated my school. The teachers tell students what they have to tell them. They are not interested in what they think. The teacher is interested only in what they think. The teacher is interested only if the children use the right words. Children become accustomed to saying the right words, not the real words. And that's how they become two different people. From chapter 10, International Pioneer Camp. In Almaty, Kazakhstan, July 1990, an international camp for Japanese, Russians, and Americans, and I was the counselor. It was our last day. We gathered cross-legged on the ground, on woven mats around an elaborate red cloth banquet area filled with fruit, vegetables, and the sheep's head in front of our hosts. At the conclusion of the banquet, as a token of respect, the host offered us the delicacy of the sheep's eye, which he would be honored for us to eat. I panicked. My God, eat a sheep's eye? My excuse came quickly. I'm sorry, I am a teacher. I do not eat pupils. Pavel translated my comment, and after a brief pause and laughter, hesitant smiles from our host, Ed, my fellow counselor, having an extra vodka, dropped both of the eyes in his mouth, dipped his fingers into the brain, lukewarm and uncooked, and ate it. A friend asked me after I returned from my first trip, why would you, Frank, who claim to be interested in understanding your inner self, choose to do it in one of the most inaccessible countries on the planet? A baffling question. I intended to travel behind the Iron Curtain to meet real Russians. I wasn't thinking about me, yet her question provoked me to realize I would have to reveal myself to Russians if I expected them to do the same to me. Were I not to, I would not have a chance to know them beyond external niceties. Another way to say it, if I were to guard who I was, the Russians would emulate that posture. I would have come home able to share only what I'd observed, not what I could have learned from the people. And since childhood, I had a bored feeling outside. I had always wanted to belong, and to do that, I had to become vulnerable. In the last paragraph of the book, my relationship with Russians became unwritten contracts in which each of us trusted the other to speak honestly in our encounters. And the more I came to know them, the more I fell in love with them, even with those with whom I had a falling out. I have taken the responsibility to write compassionately because they opened their hearts and minds countless times in countless circumstances, and they opened mine. And here's a final comment, an epigraph of the book from Keith Sharon of the Manchester Union Leader, who interviewed me in Leningrad in 1986. After school, Thoms will walk to his hotel room on the Nevsky Prospect with a small tape recorder pressed against his cheek. He refuses to forget a smile, a tear, or an important confrontation with Soviet life. He gathers impressions of the Soviet Union like a real-life Holden Caulfield, the consummate social satirist. Nothing seems to escape his discerning eye. By watching and interacting, Thoms believes he is helping civilization from going over the cliff. A teacher in the rye. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Liza, for inviting me, and to you and Michael for making this Zoom possible. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Frank. That was great. I've just put a thing in the chat. If anybody has questions, please enter them and I will share them and we'll continue the conversation for another little while. I do have a question though about the hat in the beginning when you came out. I'm sure there's a story, and maybe you can share that while people are thinking of other slightly more serious questions they might want to be asking you.
Well, this was pretty serious for me, actually, because I wrote the entire book and I never mentioned a Russian hat. And the first trip I went to there, I was insisted on coming home with a hat, and I bought one at the Berezovsky. I prefer to get it on the street. But I bought one and brought it home. It was a black rabbit hat, a people's hat. And I love that hat. And I would wear that hat in New England weather in the winter with great pride. I never put the flaps down because that's what Russians didn't do. But I wore it, and I could, over the tips of my ears, I would be very comfortable. Well, on the last trip to Gorbachev's Russia, I'm on a train from Leningrad to Finland for my last flight home. I'm sitting on a train, and a man in a blue suit is having a conversation with me. He's asking me a lot of questions in perfect English, and I shared some of the things in my two large black duffel bags with him. But as I was talking, I began to realize maybe he wasn't just the person next to me. Maybe he was KGB. I don't know. Anyway, when I got home, the 2 bags never arrived and my black Russian hat was gone. I was devastated, but that's what happened. So in 1994, when I went with my teachers, I asked if they knew where I could get a hat. Nothing more was said, and 2 weeks later, when I just before I left, they gave me this hat, a new hat. And I got home, I was so thrilled. I put it on, and for about 2 or 3 years, I loved my new black hat. But one day I looked at it, it's brown. I didn't know that. It's brown, and it's not a rabbit hat. It's probably made of fox. So I didn't have the people's hat anymore, and I was a bit upset, but I've decided that I really love this hat as much because I can put it on anytime I want, anywhere I want, even in Mexico, and I do. So that the hat has a real, and it could have made a really good metaphor because when I put it on with the Russians, I felt close to them. And it could have been another metaphor along with the matryoshka and the red veil. But the perils of being a writer, you make mistakes, and that's what happens.
So that actually leads to a good next question. A couple of people have asked if you're still in contact with the people you formed relationships with back 30 years ago, if those connections have continued.
Oh yes, as you know, I mentioned Katja Schreiber. My best friend, Misha Baushev, was in Moscow. Shortly after I left, he went to Moscow to work for McKinsey & Company, and he and Natasha moved there, and we stay in touch. And Elena, another friend of mine in Leningrad and St. Petersburg, we stay in touch. And I was going to go this spring to St. Petersburg to meet with them and former students and other teachers, but the COVID, of course, canceled that. Mm-hmm. But recently, I heard distressing news from Misha. He got the COVID, and he's okay with it, but his wife, Natasha, is now in the hospital not on a breathalyzer, but on an oxygen machine. She can get off it about a half an hour or so a day, but she's only at level 4 out of 10 in terms of oxygen being put into her. Mm-hmm. So our fingers are crossed that she will be fine. But yes, and Misha became the very dearest friend a person could ever have. Russians are special that way.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about her. I hope she pulls through.
Thank you.
Question about teaching approaches that you were exposed to over there in the Soviet Union. Are there any that you thought were so wonderful that you brought them back to the US?
Absolutely the opposite. Soviet pedagogy was the same in every school I was in, whether it was in Kazakhstan, Moscow, Leningrad, Tallinn, Estonia. The teachers teach from the textbooks, the students memorize the textbooks, the students stand to answer a question, they repeat the information that they've learned from the textbook and sit down. There's never any interaction between students in the classroom, etc. Of course, there were exceptions, and my friend Raisa was one of them. She allowed her students to do a lot of interacting. But the general pedagogy was something I couldn't bring home and use because I abhorred being a lecture, answer back to me kind of teacher anyway. I preferred to ask questions and see what happened in the classroom. So I learned a lot by watching them, but I did meet some teachers who were exceptional, and it's nice to know that they were there at that time.
Okay. And is this book going to be available in Russia?
I'm hoping so. We're not sure. My agent is working on an arrangement to maybe have the book translated. We're not sure. But I have a lot of kids who I used to teach who are now adults, and I'm in touch with a number of them on Facebook. If the word gets out, we might be able to sell a lot of English language textbooks there. But it has to get out to all the people at School 185. I doubt I'll reach anybody at School 169 because that door kind of closed after I left, where at School 185 I kept going back and visiting. However, there is a story there that the director heard that I was saying nasty things about her school in New Hampshire. And one of her former students who emigrated to the US told her. And she believed him that I had talked badly about her school, and she decided that I was a persona non grata. So she's one of the persons who I had a falling out with that I still love dearly. but she has passed away also, as long as, and Raisa has, and my very closest friend and boss in English department head also, all three of them have passed on, and I've dedicated the book to them.
Huh. Okay. So this was a question early on, and it might be too long for this process, but I thought it was an interesting question about when you were most surprised or most frightened or most happy in your travels in Russia. I mean, it sounds like the first encounter at the airport I would have found most surprising, but then you ran into the guys that knew the Dartmouth students, and that would be surprising. So was there a most surprised experience?
Well, I'm not going to tell you the story about what happened with Heather and Carol and Alexei and Roman in Leningrad on that Saturday, because I'd rather have people read the book and look at the process of what happened. But it was a surprise that when they said to me, that they knew these girls and were going to meet with them, I was like, in a city of 5 million people, these two black marketers could tell me that they were going to meet Dartmouth students that night. And another surprise that happened right after was I was desperate to find a bathroom at that time, because I'd been wandering the Nevsky Prospect, just trying to find the school. So Roman took me downstairs underneath the street into a bathroom that was urine all over the floor. It was absolutely horrible, but I had no choice. And when I came out, he just grinned, because Alexei had said before I went down, "Hey, Roman, take Frankie to his first Soviet toilet," because they knew and I didn't. And there were surprises like that happened, like meeting Lara and her telling me that she takes heroin. Constantly people coming in front of me doing things that I didn't expect. So, I don't know, I also was surprised at the end of my School 185 time. I was surprised that they gave me a 2-hour concert in my honor, over and over and over, and just said, "Please come back and come back." And then when I came back, I went into the office and I was kicked out. So, I mean, it was constantly unexpected things, but that's one of the joys of being in another culture. You don't know, you take a breath and you go on. And that's what I did. That's the best I can say.
I think that's a good answer. So did you teach, this is the question, is how did you teach English to them? Did you use immersion where you didn't allow them to speak Russian, or did you speak Russian to them? How did that language exchange happen?
Well, my Russian was chut-chut, really tiny. I mean, I had 10 days of Russian with Nina Losef at Dartmouth before the first trip. I had the Norwich University School in the summer before, but it wasn't bad. I could say Russian words well, but I didn't have a lot of vocabulary. So as a teacher of English in the classroom, it was English. That's what the kids had to speak English. That's all they could do. And I couldn't use Russian at all to help them, which really helped them. I had no ESL training. I had no idea what teaching English was to a foreign student. I just went ahead and I was myself. And what I found, I started using the textbooks and having kids repeat the textbooks, but I quickly gave those up. And I started, once I asked the kids a personal question about something, instead of hands raising like one like this, like that, they would just shoot up into the air, kids, almost leaving their desk, wanting to talk to the American. And we had incredible conversations. I drew stick figures on the board. I told jokes. I walked up and down the aisles. I didn't stand still like Soviet teachers would do. And they just had a ball, and we just laughed and had a great time. And they would greet me in the hall with hugs. And it was just, I just did it the way it felt like would work. And I think it did. I think it did. But the one time I didn't share a piece, it was a group in Kazakhstan. In the last school I taught in, school number 15, which I found on my own also after the pioneer camp, I had a special relationship with 10B, an English group. And we got really close together. And we never used Soviet textbooks. We used materials that I brought into the class, and they wanted to talk about the afterlife and reincarnation. And there's some wonderful conversations in the book about them. But it was a whole different personal approach. It became quiet. I wasn't the jumping up and down teacher. We had interesting conversations. Tanya brought apples in one day, and we all had apples for a while. And then I used the apple as a metaphor for where do we all come from? Where does the seed come from? What does it mean? What about the seeds coming back? And we just got into all kinds of wonderful conversations. These 16-year-olds were very special. And we even went sledding in the Altai Mountains, very near the Tian Shan of China, having a great time sliding on plastic bags inside plastic bags. It was just a remarkable group of kids who I wish I was close to them, but we lost track. The dresses all changed when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I don't know what's happening to them, but if I ever find out, I will probably break out and cry.
Okay, so one more question, and there's lots of other questions. This could go on for hours, but I'm going to ask one more.
You can send them to me if you want to.
It's a great wrap-up question, and that is a question about what the impetus, or say a little bit more about why this book that you wrote so long ago was revived and now exists. Like, what was that process? What is the thought behind that?
Well, long ago in 1988, 89, 90, when I was writing the book the first time, it started out on the Noda farm in Meriden, New Hampshire, where I was living when I resigned from teaching in Hanover. And I transcribed maybe 100 hours of tapes that I had. And I began to put together a book. But when Gorbachev resigned, I just put it away. It was almost completed, but it really wasn't very good. Long paragraphs, long sentences. I wasn't a writer. I was just writing for the first time. So 5 years ago, I've written 4 books since then, which I published. I picked it up again, and I completely reshaped it. And with the red veil concept that I mentioned, it became a book that I think really works. But my writing process is a very slow one. I write sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. I don't do a first draft and then go back and revise. I can't do that. I think and react and compose and revise and compose. That's my style. That's the way I write. And I even write emails that way. I write along and I stop writing, go back and fix the first sentence and go to the second. It's just the way I write, and it works for me, and I like it. But the impetus came 5 years ago because of the Russia issue in America and the elections. And I said, well, I have something to say about Russians a long time ago, but maybe this would help Americans see the Russians as people. So that's what I have done. And I absolutely loved the writing process, almost as much as the adventure itself, but not quite, not quite.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Frank. This has been a really amazing evening. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thank everybody who came. And that's the book. The book is going to be at the store if you're interested. Unfortunately, Frank can't stop by and sign them since he's nowhere near us.
But I promise, if the COVID's over, I will come and I will sign anybody's book in your shop, I hope.
Okay. So we'll follow that thread along over time. We know you don't let things drop, so.
No, I don't. Thank you very, 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 very much.
And stay tuned for future events and come get the book.
Okay.